Hey everybody, and Tony here with my penultimate Red Ribbon Reviewers album review of Puccini's Turandot, which was released from Warner Classics on July 7, 2023. The conductor was Antonio Papanno. The chorus and orchestra were the Orchestra e Coro dell'Accademia di Santa Cecilia di Roma, and the soloists were Sondra Ravenovsky as Turandot, Ermone Lejajo as Liu, Jonas Kaufmann as Calaf, Michael Spires as Alto, Mattia Olivieri as Ping, Gregory Bonfatti as Pang, Siabonga Makungo as Pong, Francesco Tomma as the Prince of Persia, Michele Pertussi as Timur, and Michael Maffidian as the Mandarin. I was quite skeptical when initially listening to this particular album version of Puccini's Turandot because I had some rather mixed feelings of the three main leads, i.e. Jonas Kaufmann as Calaf, Sondra Ravenovsky as Turandot, and Ermone Lejajo as Liu. Aside from the three leads, I also did have a little bit of skepticism for Michael Spires as Altum, but I'll gladly talk about them much later in this review. So when I listened to this particular recorded version of Puccini's Turandot during my flight from Sydney to Berlin, as well as listened to it again and again and again online via Spotify, I thought it was decent at best, although there could have been a lot more improvements. I do question why there was the solo version of Nessun Dorma added into this album before Ping, Pang, and Pong intercept in the next track, and I also question why In Questa Reggia was split into two parts, from the main aria all the way up to O Principe de lunghe caravane. And I also found the entire riddle scene being split into various tracks just as questionable, if not just as jarring, thus making the track listing, let alone the track arrangement, kind of jumpy and messy. Additionally, it would have been more tolerable if some of these tracks were just one track altogether and not just split into various tracks. Other than that, this was still a decent package, although I do have some reservations when it comes to the main singers, as well as for the singer for Altoum, i.e. Jonas Kaufmann as Calaf, Michael Spires as Altoum, Sondra Ravenovsky as Turandot, and Ermone Lejajo as Liu. With that said, let's get on to what I thought about Sondra Ravenovsky as Turandot. I have been admiring Sondra Ravenovsky as a natural dramatic coloratura soprano who can also sing some full lyric soprano roles. I've enjoyed her Antonia from Le Conte of Man, Leonora from Trovatore, Elena from Vespri Siciliani, and even to some extent Norma from Bellini's Norma, unless I forget about the three Donizetti queens, Anna Bolena, Maria Stuarda, and Elisabetta from Roberto Devereux. However, as she has been tackling a lot more spinto soprano and dramatic soprano roles, I've noticed that there were some problems in her voice that I could not afford to overhear, let alone overlook. And as I've been listening to Sondra Ravenovsky a lot more critically, I've noticed that there were problems with her core, problems with her intonation, as well as problems with how she was coordinating head voice and chest voice, as well as the little bit of woofiness and nasality found here and there. In spite of all those vocal faults, at least Sondra Ravenovsky has at her disposal extremely reliable top notes, and her voice is quite sizable when it comes to singing over an orchestra and how she manages to penetrate over that orchestra with that naturally sizable voice, although there were some vocal reservations to be found in how she coordinated head voice and chest voice, as well as her timbre sounding a little bit more fluttery these days, and having moments where her vowels sounded rather imprecise. Therefore, listening to Sondra Ravenovsky with more critical ears made me realize just how much of an intermittent singer she is in terms of the results that she can produce, whether she has a good night and produces really strong clarion tones, as well as her fault of not coordinating head voice and chest voice presents a lot of problems that affect the overall quality of her voice. And when I heard that she was about to sing Turandot, alarm bells were ringing because I've always associated Turandot to be sung by a natural, dramatic, let alone Wagnerian soprano. Voices such as Gertrud Grob-Brandl, Birgit Nilsson, Ingeborg, Rose Pauli, Erna Schluter, Bianca Scacciatti, Dame Eva Turner, Gena Dimitrova, Giovanna Cassolla, Rosidelli, Christelle Goltz, Ingrid Steger, Lyudmila Vorakova, Amy Sheward, and Nadezhda Kniplova come to mind when it comes to their extremely sizable voices. If I wanted blazing top notes, I could never ever go wrong with Gertrud Grobbrandl and Birgit Nilsson. If I wanted a lot more wildness, fierceness, and a lot more imposing intimidation in the voice, I could never go wrong with the likes of Lyudmila Vorakova, Nadezhda Kniplova, as well as Amy Sheward. And in terms of the complete package, I could never go wrong with Rose Pauli, Dame Eva Turner, Bianca Scacciatti, and Erna Schluter. As for roundness, Grace Bumbry and Gena Dimitrova are my main ladies. Yes, Sandra Radvanovsky does have her reliable top notes, and those top notes managed to be ringing, and they recorded quite well in the studio. And those same top notes, whether she sings her high C's and high B's, as well as her high A's, managed to be thoroughly ringing, especially considering that she, Yaho, Kaufman, Spires, and the rest of the cast are recording the complete Alfano version in which Turandot and Khalaf sing extra high notes and have these extra passages that they sing before the opera culminates. Aside from Sandra Radvanovsky's top notes being a fine asset to her performance as Turandot, she does have moments of sensitivity to make her portrayal of this role surprisingly nuanced. However, the faults found in her lack of core, let alone not connecting head voice and chest voice well as a voice that doesn't really sound dramatic, let alone steely enough for Turandot, cannot be overlooked. Because despite the PR saying that she is one of the finest dramatic sopranos of these days, I refuse to give her that label because she's not really a dramatic soprano. She's a natural dramatic coloratura soprano who can sing full lyric roles and who could also sing some spinto soprano parts with some intermittent results. I initially thought that if she had just continued to sing the likes of Mimi, Liu, Cho-Cho-san, and Alice Ford, she would have been fine all the way through because I initially believed that she had a naturally lyric soprano voice. However, thanks to a conversation that I had with a close online friend, he argued that she does have the top notes, she does have the agility, and she does have the florid singing if she had trained her voice well. Thus, she would have been a much better dramatic coloratura soprano. Even with the vocal shortcomings of Sandra Radvanovsky not being as steely, let alone as metallic as Turandot, or even not sounding like a true Wagnerian, let alone dramatic soprano, or even her uncoordinated chest voice not doing her any favors, let alone her imprecise articulation of her vowels hampering her overall vocal performance, at least Sandra Radvanovsky managed to blast her high notes well, and she was also able to find some moments of tenderness to make her performance as Turandot a little bit more nuanced. She may not have the blasting high notes of Nilsson, Grobbrandl, Jones, or even the likes of Borakova or Kniplova, but at best she did a serviceable job, all thanks to her sufficiently sizable voice as well as her reliable top notes, although I still argue that a natural dramatic soprano would have served the role of Turandot much more superbly. When all is said and done, at least Sandra Radvanovsky was still quite reliable as Turandot, even with her vocal faults. Ermonea as Liu is yet another soprano I have actually grown a little bit more critical about, especially when it came to listening to her a lot more in depth, as well as realizing that she did have some vocal faults that have been hampering her recent performances. Yes, once upon a time, her performances in a lot more florid coloratura soprano roles, i.e. Violetta from Traviata, as well as Maria Stuarda, and even a lot of the lighter roles like Amina from La Sonambula were more of her roles, and even her portrayal of Mimi fit her like a glove quite well. However, as she has been tackling a lot more demanding roles such as Valentine from Les Huguenots, Desdemona from Otello, and even recorded Leoncavallo's Tsatsa, her thinness as well as her lack of core and lack of coordinated chest tones made her vocally unideal for these fuller, richer, and more expressive parts. Even when it comes to singing Suor Angelica and Chocho-san, there were occasions where she didn't really have enough vocal heft to make these roles more credible. And Ermonela Yaho's vocal faults of thinness, a lack of chest voice and head voice coordination, a lack of core, breathiness, and having a timbre that is just way too light for all of these more dramatic roles like Valentine, Desdemona, and Satsa were Achilles' heels that I could never overhear, let alone overlook. At best, when she was singing Liu, which is a role that she has been singing for many years, at least she was quite passable in the softer passages. She was quite passable in singing the more floaty passages, but I miss that additional creaminess and I miss that additional body and depth required for making Liu a very palpable and credible character. Whenever I think of both the real lyric sopranos and spinto sopranos who sang Liu, I can never overlook the likes of Magda Olivero, Marian Vernet Moore, Maria Chiara, Raina Kabaiwanska, Montserrat Caballé, who, mind you, is one of my favorite interpreters of Liu of all time, Mirella Freni, Anna Moffo, Irmgard Siegfried, Teresa Stichrandl, Trude Eiperle, Leona Mitchell, Melita Museli, and Leontine Price. Those sopranos that I've mentioned had creamier, fuller, and way more reliable instruments, especially when it came to the very underrated Marian Vernet Moore, who was able to sing her chest notes so beautifully and so roundly that I was able to be thoroughly immersed with her vocal performance as this innocent, self-sacrificing slave girl. As for Ermonela Yaho as Liu, yes, she is still a pretty reliable musician in terms of what she was able to use with her naturally lyrical timbre. Yes, she can float quite well in the pianissimo passages. However, her vocal thinness and colorlessness hamper her vocal performance as Liu. Not to mention her uncoordinated chest voice, which gave her voice a lot of breathiness and not much dimension to work off of. If she had developed her core as well as coordinated head voice and chest voice, I'm sure that her performance as Liu would have been much better. But as it was, Ermonela Yaho's rendition of the entire role of Liu left a little bit to be desired. At least she still had that silvery, youthful timbre that made her quite lovely to listen to, but other than that, I would have loved for a little bit more body and a little bit more creaminess and way more dimension in that voice of hers, because Liu is way more than just this innocent slave girl. She also has to have beautiful legato lines that she has to sing well as have a lot of dimension, which unfortunately Ermonela Yaho was quite deficient in. Overall, Ermonela Yaho's rendition of Liu was just passable at best. Jonas Kaufmann, despite his woofiness and despite his throatiness, was still a virile Kalaf, and his voice does record quite well in the studio, although his issues with throatiness and woofiness cannot be overlooked. At least he can be vocally imposing, and at least he does his best to sing his high notes quite well, although he admittedly got drowned out by Sondra Radvanovsky's more sizable voice. However, what I'm missing with Jonas Kaufmann is a lot more squillo and a lot more incisiveness to make Kalaf a more imposing and more powerful character. Whenever I think of Kalaf, I think of tenors such as Giacomo Laurivolpi, Francesco Merli, Karl Haus, Helge Rosweng, Franco Corelli, Gianfranco Cecchelle, Jussi Björling, all thanks to his clarion high notes, Franco Bonisoli, in which he has the same case of equally clarion high notes as Jussi Björling has, Bruno Prevedi, and Mario Filippeschi, especially with the likes of Giacomo Lauri Volpi, Mario Filippeschi, and Franco Corelli are concerned, because these gentlemen had really incisive voices and greatly attractive timbres that made Calaf a youthful yet virile prince willing to win over Turandot's heart and therefore conquer her with all of his being. And I also dare not forget about the likes of Lando Bartolini and Giuseppe Giacomini, who are just as virile and just as clarion with their high notes. However, when it comes to my personal favorite calafs, I can never go wrong with Lauri Volpi, Filippeschi, and Corelli, because they had these naturally clarion tones that made calaf imposing, strong, virile, and courageous, as well as quite reckless. And if I wanted vocal longevity, I would never go wrong with Daniele Barioni, especially when he holds that high A when he bangs on that gong calling Turandot's name. Jonas Kaufmann unfortunately falters in terms of the demands needed for Calaf, because while he has that virility in his voice, it's marred by throatiness and woofiness. And his squillo wasn't really that clarion, let alone imposing. So what I'm left with is quite a mixed bag with having Jonas Kaufmann as Calaf. On the one hand, he was still quite virile as Calaf. On the other hand, he could have gotten rid of his throatiness and woofiness, thus making his voice sound a lot freer and more liberated from all of these vocal problems. However, despite Jonas Kaufmann's vocal problems, at least he was still able to be quite enjoyable as Calaf, even though I do demand a lot more from this particular prince. Michael Spyres was quite surprising when it came to his tenure as the old Emperor Altoum. Yes, he was able to present Altoum as a very wizened and world-weary old man, especially how he was able to color his voice. It's a pretty impressive stunt done by Mr. Spyres, although it did sound nasal, masky, and kind of unappealing to listen to when there were actually a lot more imposing and clearer altoums found in Giovanni Martinelli when he sang this role in his 80s, and even that of Peter Pierce when he recorded it alongside Montserrat Caballé as Liu and Nikolai Gyaurov as Timur, unless they forget about Joan Sutherland and Luciano Pavarotti as Turandot and Calaf respectively. Even Chris Merritt, when he sang Altoum in the 2010s, managed to still sound healthy in this role. Yes, Michael Spyres can sound vocally healthy when he needs to be, but his deliberate choice of singing nasally and maskily as Altoum was really questionable, because on his good days, he can actually sing quite clearly, although it's not a super reliable light lyric tenor voice. And even when he sings more baritonally, he does sound quite clear. Whether it's Antonio Papano's choice or Michael Spyres' personal choice of making Altoum deliberately sound like that, it didn't sound way too appealing to listen to. And I argued that Mr. Spyres should have used a lot more vocal clarity to still give the impression that Altoum, despite his old age and despite his wizened, world-weary nature, is still an emperor. But he did have some nice moments when Sondra Ivanovsky as Turandot is pleading with Altoum that he managed to sing his one single line quite well. So that's still something I could give him kudos for, but his questionable approach to making Altoum sound deliberately nasal left a lot to be desired. The one attribute that I argue is still positive about Michael Spyres is that he is still quite a convincing singing actor. As in, he was still able to sing quite clearly, although that clarity should have been a lot more intact when he was singing the entire role of Altoum. Regardless of his questionable move of making Altoum sound deliberately nasal, at least I can give Michael Spyres a lot of credit for what he was able to accomplish as a singing actor. And another thing to give Mr. Spyres credit for was how well his voice managed to record in the recording studio. The comedic trio of Ping, Pang, and Pong, sung by Mattia Olivieri, Gregory Bonfatti, and Siabonga Makungo, managed to steal the show in terms of this recorded version of Turandot. Specifically, where Mattia Olivieri's gorgeously toned lyric baritone voice managed to bring sufficient virility ability and sufficient charm for Ping, especially when he was able to sing all his lines with good focus, good clarity, and a fine amount of beauty, thus making him stand out the strongest in terms of this trio. Gregory Bonfatti is a veteran character tenor who managed to do a serviceable and fine job as Pang, all thanks to how he was able to play with this role quite well and how he was able to make this role vivacious as well as quite interesting to listen to. And not to mention, Signore Bonfatti did have a long and storied career, not only in a lot of the Italian opera houses, but also in the recording studio as a veteran character tenor, not only singing Pang, but also supporting characters like Normanno from Lucia della Mermor and even Beppe from Pagliacci, thus showing that his experience as a character tenor was always on his side and he had reliable musicianship. Siabonga Makungo was a reliable pong in which he was able to take advantage of his light tenor voice to make this character comical in nature, but also charming in his own special way. Yes, he could use a lot more clarity. Yes, he could use a lot more pharyngeal singing. And yes, he could also use a lot more covered chest tones, which are necessary for good singing, especially as a light lyric tenor. However, Siabonga Makungo managed to be fine all around, and he was able to work well off of Mattia Olivieri and Gregory Bonfatti as Pong. Therefore, Mattia Olivieri, Gregory Bonfatti, and Siabonga Makungo managed to steal the show as Ping, Pang, and Pong, all thanks to their fine comedic timing as well as really good musicianship that managed to put them head and shoulders above the rest of the soloists. I also have to give some credit to Francesco Tomma as the Prince of Persia, as he was able to present a nice light lyric tenor voice with his only utterance of Turandot, as well as what I would presume is his ghost, warning everybody that nobody should sleep tonight under Turandot's rule. Therefore, Francesco Tomma's light lyric tenor voice was still a pretty healthy sounding voice, even though he did only have moments where he sang only 1 or 2 lines. Michele Pertusi does have some roundness and richness in his basso cantante / bass baritone voice, especially when he makes Timur a long-suffering king who is constantly begging his son Calaf to not do something this reckless and stupid like trying to pursue Turandot's hand in marriage. And the way that he was able to make this wizened old king come to life managed to make me invested with Signore Pertussi's overall portrayal of Timur. However, his vocal performance is marred by some wobbles and tremolos, as well as some woofiness that otherwise made his vocal performance of Timur a little bit underwhelming when he could have used for a lot more vocal strength and a lot more vocal security. There were times that his voice sounded shaky, and there were times that his voice sounded quite past its prime. But in his defense, that sort of shakiness and that voice being kind of past its prime also gave that impression that Timur is an old king who has suffered far too much and endured so many losses, thus not wanting to lose his only son. But even with Michele Pertussi's vocal faults working against him, he was still an involving singing actor, thus making his performance of Timur solid all the way through. Michael Mephidian was an imposing Mandarin, using his bass baritone / natural baritone voice to great effect to make this particular messenger a strong and imposing character. He also managed to steal the show from everybody's feet, and I would even argue that Michael Mephidian was also one of the best performers to be on this recorded version of Turandot, aside from the comic trio of Ping, Pang, and Pong, sung respectively by Mattia Olivieri, Gregory Bonfatti, and Siabonga Makungo. Furthermore, Michael Mephidian does present a rather healthy and solid vocal technique that does have a lot of potential to keep on growing in depth as well as in richness, so long as he maintains the very good quality of his voice, as well as not given to any terrible habits that would otherwise mar his vocal performance. Thanks to Michael Mofidion's strong performance as the Mandarin, I would still love to see a lot more of him and also see how well his career shall grow from here. The conducting done by Antonio Pappano was solid all the way through. Yes, it is quite textbook. Yes, it's nothing too extravagant, let alone something that excites me too much, but he does pay good attention to the text, he does pay good attention to the music, and even though it could have used a lot more charisma as well as a lot more excitement, he was still able to be a conscientious conductor who made sure that the singers and the orchestra and the chorus managed to go together. And what more can you expect from the Orchestra e Coro dell'Accademia di Santa Cecilia di Roma? Everybody managed to contribute quite well to this recording, and they also managed to bolster the entire performance all the way through, all thanks to how Antonio Pappano managed to lead each and every one of the members. When all is said and done, Puccini's Turandot, released from Warner Classics on July 7, 2023, was a rather mixed bag, and at best it was serviceable, although there could have been way more improvements. Despite Jonas Kaufmann, Sandra Ivanovsky, and Erwin Aleajo doing serviceable jobs respectively as Calaf, Turandot, and Liu, they still were lacking in a lot of vocal resources that would have made their characters come alive a lot more. Yes, Jonas Kaufmann could have used a lot more squealo in his voice to make Calaf a lot more present. Yes, Sandra Ivanovsky could have been a lot heftier, let alone more metallic and steelier as Turandot, and she should have also coordinated head voice and chest voice well to make her performance as Turandot a lot more imposing. And yes, Ermon Aleajo as Liu could have and should have used a lot more body as well as a lot more creaminess to make her performance as Liu a lot more vocally realized. However, despite their vocal faults, at least Jonas Kaufmann's commitment as an artist, Sandra Ivanovsky's very reliable top notes, and Ermon Aleajo's surprisingly pleasing light lyric soprano voice managed to make their performances okay, although there could have been way more improvements to be done. Michael Spires as Altoum was quite surprising, although that deliberate nasality to make him be this wizened old emperor was extremely questionable. At least he can, on a good day, be clear in his singing, as well as prove himself to be a fine singing actor. Michele Pertusi, despite his wobbles and tremolos as Timur, was still an involving singing actor. The singers who really stole the show for me were the three comic ministers of Ping Pang and Pong, sung respectively by Mattia Olivieri, Gregory Bonfatti, and Siabonga Makungo. Francesco Thomas solidly sung Prince of Persia, although he only had 1 or 2 lines, and Michael Mofidion's wonderfully sung Mandarin. These gentlemen were the singers that made this particular recorded version of Turandot quite listenable, and they were able to make their performances shine quite well. With that said, I give Puccini's Turandot 2023 a rating of 3 out of 5 stars. This could have been a lot better in terms of the artistry presented here. As it was serviceable at best. But if I were to make this album a little bit better and elevate the quality of it, I would have loved to have Martin Müller as Calaf, or even Eliška Vajsova as Turandot, or Maria Agresta as Liu. And I would have even encouraged Michael Spires to not use that nasality to make Altoum come to life, but rather sing a lot more clearly. Don't get me wrong, Jonas Kaufmann, Sandra Ivanovsky, and Ermon Aleajo did serviceable jobs respectively as Calaf, Turandot, and Liu, but their vocal shortcomings could never be overlooked, and there were times that I felt like they just didn't have enough vocal heft, let alone vocal resources to make their performances come to life. Michele Pertusi, despite being a good singing actor, was marred by wobbles and tremolos that hampered his performance as Timur. At least when it came to the singers who stole the show, Mattia Olivieri, Gregory Bonfatti, Siabonga Makungo, Francesco Toma, and Michael Mofidian managed to present healthy vocal techniques that managed to make them stand out quite well. And even though Antonio Pappano's conducting wasn't particularly exciting, let alone the most nuanced or the most colorful that I've ever heard, it was still good all the way through. He was conscientious and he was able to lead the orchestra and chorus of the Accademia di Santa Cecilia di Roma quite well. Overall, this recorded version of Puccini's Turandot is a rather mixed bag. The only attribute saving this was that this was one of the recordings that had the complete Alfano ending, especially where Calaf and Turandot sing and belt out extra lines, complete with high notes. And in the right hands and the right voices could sound a lot more exciting. I dare not forget about Michael Muffidian, Mattia Olivieri, Gregorio Manfatti, Siabonga Makungo, and Francesco Toma doing really fine jobs in their respective roles, especially when their vocal resources managed to be strong all the way through. If you're a fan of Jonas Kaufmann, Michael Spires, Sandra Ivanovsky, and Ermon Eliajo, you could consider this, but I'm pretty sure that they have done way better works in other operas, let alone in other albums. So I would recommend this album if you are a fan of Jonas Kaufmann, Michael Spires, Sandra Rovanovsky, and Ermon Eliajo, as well as Michele Pertusi, or many of the other singers featured here. I would even recommend this if you're a fan of Antonio Pappano's conducting. For those of you who want really good singing as well as really good conducting, you might as well look elsewhere. And for those of you who listened to this recorded version of Puccini's Turandot released by Warner Classics back on July 7, 2023, what'd you think of it? Did you feel that Sandra Ivanovsky and Ermon Eliajo stole the show as Turandot and Liu respectively? Did you feel that both leading ladies were okay in their roles? Or did you also feel that they were insufficiently voiced for these two roles? Did you also feel that Jonas Kaufmann was decent as Calaf? Or did you also feel that Michael Spires surprised you as Altoum, whether it be in a positive or negative way? Were there any other singers that stole the show in this particular recorded version of Turandot? Or did you feel like the overall package presented here was not really to your liking? And did you also feel like this faltered in your ears? Please let me know in the comments below. Well, that's it for my album review of Puccini's Turandot, released from Warner Classics on July 7, 2023. Tune in next time for my final Red Ribbon Reviewers review of Jonas Kaufmann, The Sound of Movies. And I am quite excited for this particular album review. So until then, have a great day, everybody.